Alright y'all, so what's up? So before we get into this video, I just want to give a brief synopsis as to what this video series and this channel, as well as other video series in the future, are going to be about. Basically this channel was just created to give black people, especially black people of the Americas, a better understanding of our true and exact history, because a lot of our history has either been mistaught or contorted in a way to lead black people astray, or just outright hidden, and even some historical narratives destroyed. So this channel is just basically meant to act as a tool, an educational tool, for black people to have a reference to refer back to whenever they want to hear real history, real so-called black history. So that's basically what this channel was created for. Each video is going to have a multitude of volumes. So this video right here, for example, that I'm about to that is about to play, is volume 1 for the Black Viking series. And so after this volume, which is going to be a informational, educational volume, that's pretty much what every video's volume 1 on this channel is going to consist of, just a brief synopsis of the people that I'm going to be talking about's history. So after this volume, which is volume 1, is going to come volume 2, which is going to consist of just proof that the people that I'm talking about are actually black. So it's going to be a bit of an investigation as to the origins, and even into the to just, like I stated, the proof that these people were actually so-called black people. And then if need be, which for this video there will need to be a third volume, which is just going to act as an extension of volume 2. So that's basically what this channel is going to consist of. I would encourage people to watch all 3 volumes. I know some people might want to be eager to skip volume 1, which is the informational portion, and go to volume 2 or volume 3 to see the proof that these people were black, which is understandable. But I would like for people to actually view all 3 volumes, so that as we're going through these different cultures, which are our cultures, we can have a better understanding, or we can have we can place things in their proper historical context as we go through these different investigations and as to who these people were in history. So so I would just encourage everybody to watch all 3 volumes, and that's basically what this channel is going to be about. And without further ado, let's get into the video. The origins of the Scandinavians go back to the existence of the ancient Aboriginal tribes of Germany, known as the Germanic tribes, who were the ancestors of the Vikings and the main group of people who would inhabit the 3 main Scandinavian kingdoms, that being Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. The Vikings had a very ardent warrior culture, comparable to other ancient civilizations that came before them, such as the Greek Spartans during the Iron Age, but their warrior culture was a unique one in and of itself. From a young age, the Scandinavian boys would be indoctrinated with the art of war and what came along with their way of life. They were trained on how to wield their weapons on the battlefield, with their main weapons being clubs, swords, battle axes, spears, and a bow and arrow. Rigorous training regimens resulted in the young warriors becoming equally as good with both hands in wielding their weapons, and built up their bodies to be as muscular as possible in order to use their swords. The Vikings believed participating in war was the most surefire way to acquire fame and riches, and that their exploits on the battlefield would be remembered in the annals of history for years to come. Oftentimes, when a man could no longer fight in battle, he would have his friend kill him, with the hope that he wouldn't be excluded from the highest honor a Viking warrior can receive once they die, that being entering into Valhalla. Valhalla was a place where the bravest and most honorable warriors were sent after their death, and was a heaven-like place for the warrior caste of the Scandinavians. It was believed that the deceased heroes, who would then become known as Einherjars, were warriors that would await for the cataclysmic event known as Ragnarok, the apocalyptic series of events that would lead to the end of the world. These warriors would be guided into Valhalla by the Valkyries, who were the maidens of their chief god Odin, and would enjoy passing their time fighting one another during the day, but at night would enjoy a festival meal that consisted of the flesh of a boar called Sarmir. Cowards who feared battle and the dangers of war would be cast down to Helheim, which was the Scandinavians' version of hell. The main home of the Scandinavian deities was Asgard, which by conventional designations is in Sweden. The main deities that the Norsemen worship were Odin, the All-Father, who was the chief god of all the other gods; Thor, the god of war, thunder, fertility, and strength; Freya, the goddess of love and war; Frigg, the goddess of marriage, consort of Odin, and mother of Balder, the wisest of all the gods, hence why he is known as the god of wisdom; and lastly, Loki, the trickster god of mischief and treachery. The language of the Scandinavians was a 16-character marking script known as the runic script. Runes were often used as a means to heal and cure diseases, as well as, believed by the Scandinavians, to stop thunderstorms and hurricanes. Runes were also used as a means of communication and would often be carved on wooden tablets or stones and would be sent away as a letter. The Scandinavians would also use rune stones as a form of remembrance of notable men and their accomplishments. The most famous rune stones of all were the ones seen in Scandinavian towns such as Jelling, which was a town around the southern regions of the Jutland Peninsula in Denmark. The Scandinavian society was based in a very organized hierarchical system. The lowest in terms of overall social status were the slave caste known as thralls, who were divided between native Scandinavians and foreigners, mainly from the British Isles and Eastern Europe. The peasantry known as carls, which made up the bulk of the Scandinavian population, and would be freeborn citizens who possessed land and would often rely on their agricultural skills. Above them were the chieftains or leaders that had a greater level of influence than the peasantry, often due to them having possession of much larger properties and being the descendants of noble families. The aristocracy of the Scandinavians would inherit and would be designated to rule over conquered provinces and would be bestowed with the title of a jarl, which is where the term earl and the concept of earldom derives from. The highest ranking member of Scandinavian society was of course the king, although their power was limited to a degree. The king could not do anything without the consent of the peasantry and the chieftains, who would meet with the Scandinavian monarchs at the assize, which was a judicial inquest where the peasants and noblemen would discuss matters of war, laws, and whether or not they were good enough to be either passed or vetoed. Kings would also be elected here as well, but the people would mostly decide to elect the hereditary successor of the throne, usually the eldest son of the previous king. Though limited in their decisions, the kings would still have the power to alter laws and even make new ones, as well as fulfilling their duty of leading their subjects to war. The first Scandinavian presence in the British Isles can be found during the 5th century AD, when two Germanic brothers by the name of Hengist and Horst were said to have led the three Germanic tribes of the Angles, Jutes, and Saxons into Britain. The two brothers were believed to have been invited into Britain by the king of the Britons, Vortigern, who hoped that the two brothers would assist him in defending the British kingdom against Pictish or Scottish raiders who sought to invade Britain. They would initially do what the king hoped for, defeating the Picts in 449 AD, but this partnership would be a short-lived one and would result in the two Germanic brothers turning on the Britons and leading an invasion with other Germanic tribes to colonize Britain, and would eventually establish the first Anglo-Saxon kingdom known as Kent. The second instance of a Viking presence in the British Isles came in 793, when the Vikings would raid the island Lindisfarne, which was deemed as the holy island off the coast of what is now Northumberland in northeastern England. Here resided the monastery of Lindisfarne that was founded in 635 by an Irish monk named Saint Aidan, and would be one of the main monasteries associated with the legendary Saint Cuthbert of Lindisfarne. The Vikings would raid the Holy Church of God on the island of Lindisfarne and would either kill the monks of this church, throw them into the sea, or carry them away as slaves, while also carrying some of the church's most prized possessions and treasures. A couple years later, in 795, there would be another raid, this time coming in the island of Iona Abbey off the coast of Scotland, which would be the first attack on the monastery of Iona, where the monks that had occupied this space had lived and worked for centuries. Following the invasion of the Scottish island of Iona would come the invasion of multiple monastic settlements along the coast of Ireland. In 795, Viking longships, which would reach up to 45 to 75 feet in length and were a staple in Viking warfare, would reach Ireland. The Vikings first turned their attention to the monasteries along the east coast, such as the monastery of Lambay Island. In 841, they established the first Hiberno Norse kingdom by the name of Dublin, which is still to this day the oldest Norse kingdom in Ireland. In 853, Amilab or Olaf the White will be given the title of the first king of Dublin. In 854, the Danes would invade Wales, but their attempt to conquer the Welsh homeland would prove to be more difficult than the others. This was largely due to the ardent militaristic forces led by the King of Wales at the time, Rhodri the Great. The Danes would try to invade the island of Anglesey and Gwynedd, but would of course have little to no success, eventually being defeated 2 years later, while also suffering the loss of their leader Gorm, who was killed in battle. In the late 9th century, the Vikings would orchestrate a series of invasions against Anglo-Saxon England, particularly the northern, central, and eastern regions, mostly by Danish armies. These regions would become the areas in which the Danes would hold sway and would become known as the Danelaw. The Danelaw will come off the heels of a massive invasion by a potent Scandinavian army known as the Great Heathen Army, led by the two sons of legendary Danish Viking leader Ragnar Lodbrok, Ivar the Boneless, and Halfdan Ragnarsson. The Great Heathen Army would capture Northumbria and its capital York, which was known amongst the Vikings as Jorvik, while also removing the current kings of that time period, Osbert of Northumbria and his successor, Aella of Northumbria, and would replace these two with Ecgbert I of Northumbria. The Danes would continue their invasion in 869, where they were able to conquer the kingdom of East Anglia, and would continue to assert their dominance over the English until 871 at the Battle of Ashdown, where they were defeated by Athelred and the later legendary Anglo-Saxon king Alfred the Great. However, the death of Alfred's brother King Aethelred would leave the Anglo-Saxons in a period of uncertainty, which led to the now King Alfred having to pay tribute to Ivar the Boneless in order to keep the Danes at bay. While the Danes held the English under their subjugation, they proceeded to attack the kingdom of Mercia, which lasted until 874. The now legendary Ivar the Boneless would die during this campaign, but would be succeeded by another Danish Viking leader Guthrum, who took over the Danish army and continued the assault on Mercia. The Danes would gain control over all the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms except for Wessex, which was the kingdom presided over by Alfred the Great. Alfred would end up defeating the Danes in 878 at the Battle of Edington and would force them to surrender while also demanding that Guthrum be baptized in Christianity, with King Alfred acting as his godfather. In 886, the Treaty of Alfred and Guthrum was made, which defined the boundaries between the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings and would include 15 new territories that the Danes presided over, including York, Leicester, Essex, Cambridge, and many others. The Danes being in such close proximity to the Anglo-Saxons would lead to the creation of a new dialect known as Anglo-Norse. Later in the 10th century, the Anglo-Saxons led by Edward the Elder, king of the Anglo-Saxons, would conquer the Danish territories in the Midlands and East Anglia, forcing Danish earls to submit to them in order to keep their land. The Viking rule in England would end when Eric I's blood axe was driven out of Northumbria in 954. This would lead to a seismic shift for the Vikings and would cause a massive expansion out to regions such as the Scottish regions of the Hebrides, Orkney, the Faroe Islands, the British Isle of Man, Shetland, Ireland, Iceland, Greenland, France, the Baltics, Russia, and Ukraine. They would also expand out to the region known as Newfoundland, which is what we would call today Canada, while also reaching North America in 1021 and are regarded as the very first Europeans to land in North America, approximately 471 years before Christopher Columbus. In 1016, the Danes were able to reprise themselves as the ruling class in England under the legendary Danish king Canute or Canute the Great. Canute will become the first king to rule over a unified Scandinavian kingdom, which is made up of Denmark, parts of Sweden, Norway, and a unified English kingdom until his son, Arthur Canute, would take over the throne of Denmark in 1035 and later the English throne in 1040. Arthur Canute will go on to rule England for just 2 years before his death, and the reprisal of the Anglo-Saxon bloodline in England would make itself known once again in the form of Edward the Confessor's rulership from 1042 to 1066. The end of Edward's reign would usher in a new era that would completely change the history of England, that being the Norman conquest of 1066, led by the famous Scandinavian Duke of Normandy, William the Conqueror.